Hello.
This story's got a bit of everything: love, betrayal, revenge, and maybe a bit too much blind trust on my part. I'm Martin, a forensic accountant for the SEC, and let's just say my life was pretty solid for a while. I had a job that kept me busy, a wife, Rebecca, who I thought was my partner for life, and a best friend, James, who I'd trusted for years. And I thought I was careful, you know? I see scams and cons all day, yet I didn't see it coming in my own life. Rebecca was the kind of person you never think would hurt you. She was supportive, funny, and had a smile that would make you think everything was going to be okay. And James, well, we'd been through a lot together. He was practically family. But as it turns out, that closeness was exactly the problem. I was completely blindsided by the two people who knew me best. It all started unraveling one regular Tuesday. I went to check our joint bank account because Rebecca mentioned she'd made some big purchases. I figured it was for the house or something important. But the number staring back at me didn't make sense. There was practically nothing left. I mean, we'd saved for years, and it was all gone. So I call her up, keeping my cool, just asking if she moved money around. She laughs it off, says I worry too much, and then says she'll talk when she gets home. But here's the thing, I'm a forensic accountant. Numbers are my life, and I know when something's off. I start digging, and the more I find, the worse it gets. Not only did she empty our account, but it turns out she wasn't alone. She and James had been working together on this for months. They siphoned money out in small amounts over time, taking advantage of my busy schedule and my trust. By the time I'd pieced it all together, they were already gone. The house was empty. She'd packed up while I was at work. And just like that, the life I thought I had gone. I can't describe what that did to me. It wasn't just the money. It was the betrayal. It was realizing I'd been played by the two people I trusted most. But if there's one thing you don't mess with, it's a guy who knows his way around a balance sheet. After that first gut punch, I sat there in our empty house, just numb. Everything felt hollow. I went through our rooms, looked at the pictures that Rebecca hadn't bothered to take, and it hit me, I was alone. My mind was racing, bouncing between anger and humiliation. How could I miss this? I deal with fraud for a living, but in my own life, with my own wife and best friend, I didn't see it. I spent that night in our living room, digging through every detail I could find. Bank records, credit cards, even phone bills. I wasn't sleeping anyway. I found texts, hidden emails, hotel reservations, every single receipt of betrayal. They weren't careful, probably thinking I was so busy with my SEC cases that I'd never notice. But they didn't count on one thing. Once I know I've been deceived, I go all in. I tore through everything, looking for any hint of where they went. The next day, I went to work like normal. Nobody knew a thing. I kept it together, focused on the cases in front of me, but my mind was somewhere else. I was counting down the minutes until I could get home and continue the search. I needed to know everything. Then came the big twist. Buried in their texts, there were hints of an escape plan. They didn't just take my money and run. They'd set up accounts in my name, forged documents to drain assets, and racked up debts that, on paper, looked like mine. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning to leave me broke and ruin my reputation in the process. When it clicked, my anger hit a new level. They thought they could destroy me. But if they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. I'd spent years tracking down corporate criminals, finding loopholes, and getting people nailed for exactly this kind of fraud. That night, I sat down with a plan. I'd already started tracking every penny they took. Now I was going to hunt them down, not just for the money but for the sheer satisfaction of watching their world collapse just like mine had. They had no idea what they'd started. For the next few days, I went about my life like nothing was wrong. At work, nobody suspected a thing. I kept up with my cases, I clocked my hours, I smiled when I had to. But as soon as I got home, I was in detective mode. I wanted to know every single detail of what they'd done, every step they'd taken to cover their tracks. After a week, I got a hit. Rebecca's credit card. She'd forgotten to disable one of her online purchases. Turns out, she was staying at some second-rate hotel 2 states over. Not the romantic hideaway you'd imagine for two lovebirds who'd just stolen a fortune. I guess they didn't have the nerve to spend my money on anything fancy yet. Or maybe they were hiding, keeping things low-key until they figured I'd stopped looking. So I took some time off, told my boss I had family stuff to deal with, and set off on a little vacation of my own. When I got to the hotel, I waited. Hours went by until, finally, I spotted them. They came strolling into the lobby like they hadn't a care in the world. They didn't see me, didn't even look around. It was almost insulting, like I was some fool who wouldn't dare follow them. But I let them have their moment. I'd worked long enough to know the power of patience. I watched them for the next 2 days. I wanted to be sure of my next move. I knew if I confronted them, I'd end up doing something that would probably land me in jail. So instead, I stayed out of sight, took photos, recorded everything, and traced where they'd been, who they were meeting, even the stores where they'd used the cards I'd paid for. I wanted them to feel trapped, the walls slowly closing in on them just like they'd planned for me. On my last night there, I left a little message for them. It was something small, just a note under their hotel door with one word on it, watching. I didn't stick around to see their reaction. I had what I needed. I'd watched them laugh, hold hands, pretend they were free. Now it was time to shatter that illusion. They wanted to ruin me? Fine. Now, they'd see how far I was willing to go to burn them right back. After I left that note, I drove home feeling a strange kind of calm. They thought they'd won, thought they'd cut me out of my own life, and here they were on the run, looking over their shoulders. And now, I was the one holding all the cards. But this wasn't just about revenge for me. Rebecca and James had tried to destroy my financial reputation, and in my line of work, reputation is everything. I wasn't about to let their mess tarnish my record, so the next step was to make sure every penny they'd stolen, every fraudulent charge they'd made in my name, was tracked. I needed rock-solid evidence if I wanted to take them down for good. And trust me, they weren't going to make it out of this unscathed. Back at work, I went on with business as usual. I dug deeper into my cases, worked late hours, stayed quiet. Most people didn't notice the change. They just saw a guy deeply focused on his job. But one person did notice, Jasmine, my colleague. She'd been in the office for years, knew my rhythms, my routines, and she could tell something was off. One afternoon, as I was going over financial records for an unrelated investigation, Jasmine stopped by my office and closed the door. "Martin," she said, "you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" I considered brushing her off, but Jasmine was sharp, and she knew enough about me to know when I was lying. So I told her. Not the whole story, but enough. Enough for her to understand that my wife and best friend had turned my life upside down. She listened, no interruptions, no judgment, just a quiet nod here and there. And when I finished, she leaned forward and said, "So, what are we going to do about it?" I can't describe the relief I felt in that moment. Having someone in my corner, someone I could trust. Jasmine wasn't just good at her job, she had her own history of taking down some major fraudsters. And if anyone understood how to stay one step ahead, it was her. Together, we went through the evidence I'd gathered, laying it out piece by piece. It wasn't long before Jasmine started seeing patterns, things I'd missed. She pointed out connections between Rebecca and some obscure bank accounts I never would have found without her help. Turns out, Rebecca and James had set up offshore accounts, likely hoping to disappear for good once they drained everything. But I wasn't going to give them the chance. Jasmine and I had a plan now, and it was time to set the trap. The more Jasmine and I dug, the darker things got. This wasn't just a quick betrayal or a few stolen accounts. It was like peeling back layers of rot, each layer revealing something worse than the last. Rebecca and James hadn't just been siphoning money, they'd been busy building a hidden network of shell companies and offshore accounts, all under my name. They used these setups to funnel my assets out, hoping I'd be none the wiser. Jasmine and I worked late into the night, combing through every suspicious document, following every lead. By now, she was as invested in this as I was, and honestly, I was grateful for her steadying presence. She even joked once that she felt like she was part of some high-stakes thriller. But for me, it was dead serious. I wasn't just trying to get my money back. I wanted to expose every dirty trick they'd pulled and make sure they couldn't show their faces in decent society again. About a week into our investigation, we found something that blew everything open. Buried in an email exchange between Rebecca and a consultant was a mention of someone I recognized, a high-ranking SEC official named McKay. McKay was well known in our circles, respected on the outside but rumored to have his hands in some shady dealings. He was the kind of guy who knew how to play the game, and suddenly I had this gut feeling that my situation was part of something way bigger than just a cheating spouse and a backstabbing friend. Jasmine was cautious. If McKay's involved, Martin, this could go deep. He's got influence, connections, and people watching his back. If you poke around too much, it could get ugly. I knew she was right, but I also knew I couldn't let this go. McKay wasn't just some background figure. He had power, the kind of power that could make evidence disappear and protect people like Rebecca and James. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about money or revenge anymore. If McKay was involved, this was part of a larger scheme that could be ripping off countless people, hiding under the SEC's own nose. With Jasmine's help, I started building what I called my evidence wall. We printed out everything we had: emails, transaction logs, account numbers, fake invoices, hotel receipts. My office became a chaotic mess of documents and red string connecting all the pieces. It was like something out of a detective movie, and with every new piece, the picture got clearer. Rebecca and James weren't just stealing from me. They were working for someone bigger, and that someone was protecting them. One night, as we were sifting through bank records, Jasmine leaned back and sighed, shaking her head. "You know, Martin, you could walk away from this right now. Forget about Rebecca, forget about James, and just let the SEC do its thing. There's no need for you to risk everything." I knew she was offering an out. Maybe she thought I needed one, but I shook my head. "I can't, Jasmine. This isn't just about me anymore. They dragged me into this, tried to ruin my life, and if McKay's behind it, there's no telling how many others they've taken down too. I'm not walking away. I want to see this through." She gave me a long, searching look, then nodded. "All right, then. Let's take this all the way." The next phase of our plan was delicate. I needed more than what we'd found so far if I was going to bring down McKay. I had to make it bulletproof. So I started playing dumb at work, casually mentioning I was finally moving on and letting Rebecca and James go. I figured if McKay had eyes on me, and I was betting he did, he'd take the bait and start to relax. Sure enough, after a week of laying low, I started noticing little things. Files that were misplaced at the office would suddenly show up, complete with forged signatures trying to tie me to unauthorized transactions. Someone was planting evidence against me, thinking I'd look like an easy scapegoat if this blew up. It only confirmed what I suspected. They wanted me out of the way, with enough fake evidence to bury me if I got too close to their secrets. Jasmine and I kept our work undercover. We met late at night, exchanging files over coffee and creating an airtight case. Each day we uncovered a little more of the web McKay and his cronies had spun, a network of insider trading, money laundering, kickbacks, and worst of all, blackmail. McKay wasn't just a passive player. He was running this entire operation, and my life had just been collateral damage in his game. Finally, after weeks of grueling work, we had it, a mountain of evidence that not only implicated Rebecca and James but also McKay and several others in a massive fraud ring. But just as we were putting the final pieces together, something happened that nearly derailed everything. I got a call one night, and the voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. It was Stacy, a woman I'd met recently at an industry event. She was smart, kind, and had been a welcome distraction from everything going on. We'd started seeing each other, and for a while, I thought I was actually moving forward. But now, hearing her voice tremble over the line, I knew something was wrong. "Martin," she whispered, "we need to talk. There's something I haven't told you, about McKay." My heart sank. I hadn't wanted to believe it, but deep down, I'd sensed something was off. Stacy wasn't just an innocent bystander, she was part of it. She'd been planted by McKay to keep tabs on me, maybe even to manipulate me if necessary. And now that I was getting close to the truth, she was coming clean. Or maybe she was trying to control the damage. As she confessed her connection to McKay, I felt a familiar mix of anger and betrayal rise up in me. But this time, I didn't react. I kept my voice calm, let her explain, and acted like I understood. I knew McKay was behind this, pulling her strings. And now I'd make sure she played right into my hands. I ended the call, steeling myself. Stacy and McKay thought they could fool me, control me. But they just made their biggest mistake. I was ready to bring down everything they'd built, and this time, I wouldn't stop until every single one of them paid. After that call with Stacy, I felt a new level of focus. She'd confirmed what I suspected. McKay was watching me closely, and he'd set her up to do it. But now I had the advantage. I knew Stacy's game, and I'd use it to my benefit. The next day, I met her for coffee. I acted calm, almost vulnerable, like I was tired of fighting and ready to let things go. She seemed relieved, like maybe she'd done her job, like she could relax now. While she was busy thinking I'd given up, I watched her every move. She'd glance down at her phone every few minutes, sending updates, no doubt, to McKay. Perfect. I was feeding them exactly what I wanted, letting them think I was done searching, that I'd made peace with the mess Rebecca and James left behind. But that evening, I got the break I needed. Stacy left her phone on the table when she went to the bathroom. One glance at her screen, and I saw an encrypted chat app open, with McKay's initials at the top. I snapped a quick picture of the messages. It was all coded, but I knew Jasmine could help me decode it. When I showed her the picture, she smiled. "This is it, Martin. We're close." I nodded, knowing we were almost ready. McKay thought he could hide behind layers of secrecy, but he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. With the messages from Stacy's phone, Jasmine and I finally had a direct link to McKay. The encrypted texts were short, filled with jargon, but Jasmine recognized some of the code. They were insider terms McKay's circle used to discuss trades, fake audits, and the shell companies they'd set up for laundering money. It was confirmation that we weren't dealing with just some opportunistic fraud. This was an organized network inside the SEC itself, hiding under McKay's protection. From that moment on, we played everything carefully. I kept up my act with Stacy, meeting her regularly, acting casual, letting her think I was getting over my messy divorce. She relaxed around me, probably reporting back to McKay that I was no longer a threat. Meanwhile, Jasmine and I continued piecing together our case, adding each new thread Stacy unintentionally gave us. One night, I took a risk. I casually asked Stacy about her work history, dropping a hint that I knew about her consultant past. She froze, eyes widening just slightly before she covered with a laugh. But it was enough. She didn't realize it, but she'd slipped, confirming her ties to McKay in a way no one could deny. With each meeting, Stacy unknowingly handed over more information, and each piece filled in gaps in our investigation. McKay's network of shell companies stretched across several states, hidden under layers of legitimate businesses. Jasmine and I even uncovered links to foreign accounts, places McKay and his partners had funneled millions in under-the-table deals. Finally, one night, Jasmine spread out the final documents on my office table. "We have enough," she said, voice steady with excitement. "Martin, this is airtight. We can take down McKay, Rebecca, James, all of them. They won't see it coming." It was time. We'd play our final move and hit McKay and his entire operation in a way they'd never recover from. The timing had to be perfect. Jasmine and I decided the best way to reveal everything was during the upcoming annual SEC Gala, a black tie event attended by all the big names in finance and government. It was McKay's night to shine, a place where he could flaunt his influence and connections. That night, though, would be different. It would be the night his empire crumbled, right in front of everyone. We spent the week leading up to the gala preparing. I met with Stacy one last time, keeping my face calm as I assured her I'd moved on and was focused on work again. She looked relieved, even gave me a smile, probably believing that she'd done her part and that McKay's operation was safe. If only she knew what was coming. On the night of the gala, I showed up with Jasmine. She wore a simple black dress, looking every bit the part of a calm professional partner, but her eyes betrayed a hidden excitement. We'd planted encrypted USBs around the event with all the evidence we'd gathered. All it would take was one press conference, one journalist pulling up the files on their phone, and McKay's secret empire would be public knowledge. About an hour in, as McKay stood on the stage, delivering a speech about integrity and public trust, I couldn't help but smile. He had no idea his life was seconds away from imploding. Jasmine and I positioned ourselves near the exit, and at the exact moment McKay raised his glass in a toast, Jasmine nodded to me. I took out my phone and sent a single text. Journalists and colleagues across the room suddenly got notifications, each one lighting up with proof of McKay's corruption, insider trading, and more. The whispers started, then gasps as people checked their screens and realized the weight of what they were seeing. McKay was still on stage, smiling, completely unaware of the chaos unraveling beneath him. It was like watching a storm roll through the crowd, starting as quiet murmurs and spreading like wildfire. People were huddled over their phones, eyes widening, whispering to each other, and pointing discreetly at McKay. The journalists started moving fast, some scribbling notes, others tapping frantically at their screens. A couple even pulled out cameras, quietly filming reactions. McKay, still on stage, looked around, clearly sensing something was off, but he kept going, his speech becoming a strange backdrop to the unraveling chaos in the room. Stacy spotted me across the room, and her expression shifted from confusion to something close to fear. She walked over, her smile shaky as she asked, "Martin, what's happening? Everyone's acting strange." I looked at her, letting the weight of everything settle between us. "Why don't you check your phone, Stacy? I think you'll recognize some of the names." Her face went pale as she fumbled for her phone, pulling it out and scrolling through the flood of notifications. She looked back up at me, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words. "Martin, I didn't know." "Save it, Stacy," I replied, keeping my voice low. "You knew exactly what you were doing. But now everyone knows." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted by the stage. McKay had stopped mid-speech, noticing the shift in the crowd, the eyes on him that no longer looked admiring but accusatory, shocked, even disgusted. He tried to play it off, laughing awkwardly, but the room had turned on him. People were openly talking now, murmuring words like fraud and scandal. He glanced toward the exits, like he was calculating an escape route. That's when a few federal agents, tipped off ahead of time, entered the room. I saw one of them flash his badge as he moved through the crowd, his eyes locked on McKay. And as the agent approached the stage, McKay's mask of calm finally cracked. He started to stammer, glancing around wildly, as if looking for allies, but there were none left. Everyone had seen the proof, and everyone knew. Jasmine gave me a nudge, smiling as she watched it unfold. "Looks like the show's about to get interesting," she whispered. And it did. The agent reached the stage, reading McKay his rights in front of the entire room. People were recording, snapping pictures, capturing every second of the fall of a man who'd once thought he was untouchable. I could see McKay's face go from anger to desperation, a man watching everything he'd built collapse in mere minutes. Rebecca and James were next. As the agents moved toward the exits, the crowd parted, and I spotted them in the corner, attempting to slip out unnoticed. I intercepted them, stepping in front of them just as they tried to duck through a side door. "Leaving so soon?" I asked, watching them squirm. Rebecca's eyes were wild, darting between me and the agents. "Martin, please, this isn't what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I said, my voice cold. "You two tried to ruin me, to steal everything. But now, look who's running." James, usually full of smug confidence, had nothing to say. He just glared at me, realizing he was trapped. The agents closed in, pulling them aside and cuffing them as onlookers gawked and whispered. As I stood there, watching them get led away, the weight of everything started to lift. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. They'd wanted to see me broken, but now, they were the ones facing the consequences. Jasmine came up beside me, her voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. "You did it, Martin. We did it. They're finished." I nodded, letting the reality of it all sink in. McKay, Rebecca, James, all of them were done. And I hadn't just taken back what they'd stolen, I'd exposed everything they tried to hide. The agents led them out, and I took one last look at the room. People were still buzzing, talking, pointing at the door, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle in. I knew this was only the beginning of the fallout, but finally, I was in control again. As Jasmine and I walked out into the cool night, she glanced over at me, a slight smile on her face. "So what's next?" I looked out over the city, feeling a rare kind of freedom. Maybe a fresh start. And maybe a lot less trust this time around. We both laughed, knowing I'd learned that lesson the hard way. But as we walked away from the scene of the takedown, I felt lighter, ready to finally start over. The days following the gala were a whirlwind. News of the scandal spread fast, and McKay's network of fraud and corruption was the headline everywhere. The media had a field day. Pictures of McKay in handcuffs made the front page, and as more details came to light, it became clear just how deep his corruption ran. Rebecca and James, along with several other key players, were also named as accomplices, and soon enough, they were all facing multiple charges. But the fallout didn't stop there. The SEC itself was under intense scrutiny. McKay's arrest sent shockwaves through the organization, and with each new report, more people in high positions were implicated. There were emergency meetings, high-profile resignations, and a lot of scrambling to clean up the damage. It was strange, being part of the very agency now facing public distrust, but I knew that this was what needed to happen. McKay had infected the system from the inside, and rooting him out was the only way to rebuild any kind of integrity. Through it all, Jasmine was my anchor. She'd been there for every step, and even now, as our colleagues were interviewed and questioned, we stood together, watching the aftermath of everything we'd uncovered. There was something satisfying, even oddly healing, about seeing justice play out on this scale. One evening, a week after the gala, Jasmine and I went out for a quiet drink. It felt like a celebration, though we both knew we'd never get back everything we'd lost in the process. We sat in a corner booth, sharing stories from the investigation, laughing about the moments we'd nearly been caught by Stacy or almost tipped our hand too soon. As the night wore on, Jasmine looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Martin, you've done more than just bring down McKay. You've made sure the SEC will never let something like this slip through the cracks again. It's going to change everything." I hadn't thought about it like that. But she was right. What we'd done hadn't just exposed one man or two traitors, it had set a precedent. The files we'd shared, the evidence we'd built, all of it had forced the SEC to establish stricter controls, and they were even creating a new anti-corruption standard. They were calling it the Black Protocol, a sweeping reform that would tighten internal monitoring and create dedicated teams to investigate any suspected insider corruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. What had started as a personal quest for justice had evolved into something that would reshape the industry. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling, knowing that my pain and betrayal had turned into something bigger than me. Jasmine raised her glass, giving me a small, proud smile. "Here's to the Black Protocol. And here's to you, Martin. You took on giants, and you won." We clinked glasses, the sound echoing softly in the dim light. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel bitterness or anger. Just a quiet sense of peace, knowing I'd done my part to make things right. As the months went by, I started adjusting to my new normal. Life after the scandal felt strangely calm. McKay's downfall had sparked massive changes in the SEC, and the Black Protocol was being implemented across the board. I'd get updates now and then from colleagues about the new procedures, the increased oversight, and every time, it felt like a small victory, a reminder that everything I went through hadn't been for nothing. But there was another side to all of it, rebuilding my personal life. After the betrayal, I'd put all my energy into the investigation, leaving little room to process what I'd lost. It was only now, with everything finally settled, that the emptiness started to sink in. The home I once shared with Rebecca felt like a shell, each room a reminder of the life we'd built, and the life she'd so easily destroyed. One evening, as I was going through some old files, I came across a folder I'd labeled Future Plans. Inside were sketches, blueprints, and ideas we dreamed up together, ideas for a family home, places we wanted to travel, plans we'd made for a future that, at the time, seemed certain. Seeing it now was a punch to the gut, a reminder of how thoroughly she'd fooled me. But I didn't feel anger, not anymore. Just a strange sense of release. The dreams in that folder belonged to another time, another version of me. I decided to get rid of the folder, along with everything else that tied me to that part of my life. I boxed up the pictures, the souvenirs from trips, even the gifts she'd given me over the years. It felt strange, letting it all go, but it was necessary. This was my way of moving forward, of reclaiming the space that had once felt tainted. Around this time, Jasmine started visiting more often. Sometimes we'd go out for coffee, or she'd stop by to check on me after work. She was like a quiet force in my life, steady and supportive, never pushing, always letting me move at my own pace. And in those quiet moments, I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was a future beyond all of this. One Saturday, Jasmine and I met up at a little cafe downtown. We'd spent the morning talking about anything but work, books, travel, food, and it felt refreshing, like a step into a new chapter. She looked at me over her coffee, a hint of a smile on her face. "So what's next for you, Martin? I mean, now that everything's settled." I took a deep breath, surprised by my own answer. "I don't know yet. Maybe it's time to figure out who I am outside of all this. Outside of revenge, work, everything." She nodded, understanding without needing more explanation. "Whatever it is, I think you'll do just fine." And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed her. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I'd face it on my own terms. In the weeks that followed, I found myself looking at life through a different lens. Without the constant drive for revenge, I started noticing things I'd ignored for years. A quiet afternoon on my balcony, the way the light changed in my kitchen as the sun set, even the simple satisfaction of a clean, organized space. It was like rediscovering life in pieces, learning how to feel normal again. One night, Jasmine invited me to a dinner party at her place. Just a small group of friends and colleagues, a chance to unwind. I hesitated at first, still feeling raw from everything that happened, but eventually I agreed. It was time to step back into the world, even if it felt unfamiliar. When I arrived, Jasmine greeted me with a warm smile. Her home was cozy, filled with the smell of spices and laughter drifting from the kitchen. She introduced me to a few friends, each one warm and welcoming. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere that wasn't tied to work or vengeance. The evening was relaxed, filled with conversation and laughter. Jasmine's friends talked about everything from the latest movies to their travel plans, and I found myself drawn into the easy flow of it. It was strange feeling this lightness, but I realized I missed it, the simple pleasure of connection without hidden motives or underlying resentment. Later, as the guests were leaving, Jasmine and I lingered by the door, talking in the quiet of her now empty apartment. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with that knowing expression she often had, like she could see past the walls I'd built. "You know," she said softly, "I wasn't sure if you'd come tonight. I know this isn't easy for you." I nodded, taking in her words. Honestly, I didn't know if I was ready either. But I'm glad I came. It feels good to be around people who don't remind me of everything I've been through. She looked at me, her expression shifting slightly, something almost hopeful in her eyes. "Martin, you deserve this. A life beyond everything that happened. You've been through hell, but you made it out, and that means something." Her words settled over me, a kind of warmth I hadn't felt in years. And in that moment, standing there in her quiet apartment, I realized how much she'd meant to me through all of this. Jasmine wasn't just a friend or a colleague. She'd become a part of my life in a way that felt steady, real. As I left that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something. Maybe it was a new chapter, or maybe just a quiet peace I hadn't thought I'd ever find again. Whatever it was, I knew I was ready to find out. Over the next few months, Jasmine and I grew closer. It was a slow, natural shift. Dinners after work, weekend hikes, even movie nights where we'd end up talking more than watching. She became more than just the person who'd helped me take down McKay's empire. Jasmine had been there through every moment of my darkest days, and now, she was helping me discover the lighter ones. One evening, as we were walking by the waterfront, she asked me something I hadn't really thought about. "What would you do, Martin, if none of this had happened? If Rebecca and James hadn't?" She trailed off, hesitant, like she didn't want to bring up the past but couldn't help herself. I thought about it for a while, letting the question settle. Honestly, I don't know. I thought I knew what my life was supposed to look like: work, stability, a family. But looking back, I was so focused on the next step, on some distant future, that I never saw what was happening around me. I was just on autopilot. She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Sometimes it takes losing something to make you see things clearly. I know that sounds cliché, but you're proof that it's true. Maybe it is, I admitted. But I don't want to live on autopilot anymore. I want to do something that means something, that isn't just about status or expectations. She looked at me thoughtfully, her gaze steady. "Then maybe it's time you let yourself dream a little. Think about what you want, Martin. Not what everyone else expects, just what you want." Those words stuck with me. After that night, I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, for the first time in years, I had the chance to create something completely my own. No baggage, no guilt, just the freedom to rebuild from scratch. Inspired, I started looking at new opportunities. I'd spent so much of my life in the trenches of finance and law enforcement, focused on rooting out fraud and corruption, that I hadn't considered doing anything else. But now, with the Black Protocol changing how the SEC operated, I realized there was a gap, a need for financial integrity standards that could go beyond just the SEC. The idea grew, small at first but gaining momentum. What if I could create an independent agency dedicated to training companies in ethical finance? A place that could prevent the kind of insider abuse McKay had orchestrated, not just uncover it after the damage was done. I wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what I did. One night, I told Jasmine about the idea over dinner. Her face lit up as she listened, her support genuine and unwavering. "Martin, that's exactly what you should be doing. You'd be amazing at it. You already are." Her words gave me the confidence to move forward. Over the next few weeks, I worked on a proposal, drawing on years of experience, building a vision for this new agency. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt excited, alive with purpose. I was creating something for myself, something that could help others. And Jasmine was there with me every step of the way, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. She wasn't just part of the past. She was part of my future. Launching my own agency was both exhilarating and daunting. I'd spent years working for the government, following strict rules and protocols, but now I had the freedom, and the responsibility, to create something entirely new. Jasmine and I spent countless late nights brainstorming, refining ideas, and building what would become the foundation of my agency, which we eventually named Integrity First Financial. Jasmine was there through every step, her encouragement a constant reminder that this wasn't just a pipe dream. She'd been instrumental in my revenge against McKay, yes, but she was also helping me move forward. Every time I had doubts, she was right there, reminding me that this new purpose wasn't just to protect others, but also a way to reclaim control over my own life. Setting up the agency wasn't easy. Word of McKay's downfall had spread, but some people in the finance world were still wary of working with someone who had been so close to a major scandal, even if I was the one who'd exposed it. But I took that skepticism as a challenge. I reached out to old contacts, wrote articles on ethical finance practices, and gave talks about the Black Protocol and how it was shaping the SEC. Slowly, people started paying attention. Companies that had once been indifferent to ethical standards were now interested in hiring Integrity First to train their teams and vet their financial practices. After a few months, I landed my first big contract with a mid-sized tech company looking to establish stronger internal controls. It was exactly the kind of work I'd hoped to do: preventative, proactive, and impactful. Jasmine and I celebrated that night, splitting a bottle of wine at my place, laughing about the insane journey we'd taken to get here. "You realize you're officially a business owner now, right?" she said, grinning over her glass. "Integrity First Financial has a nice ring to it." I chuckled, shaking my head. I still can't believe it. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. And now, well, I've got a new start. Thanks to you. She set her glass down, her gaze softening. "Martin, you did this. I helped, sure, but this was all you." We fell into a comfortable silence, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of contentment that went beyond just making it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something, and it felt like the beginning of a life that was truly mine. As the weeks turned into months, Integrity First began to grow. More companies signed on, and I even brought on a small team of analysts to help with the workload. Each project was another step toward establishing something that felt real and lasting. I'd even started taking on mentorship roles, working with young analysts who were just as determined as I'd been to make a difference. But in the midst of this new chapter, my past crept up in unexpected ways. One day, I received an email from Rebecca's lawyer. She was reaching out to discuss settling matters, an attempt to make peace, or so the letter claimed. She wanted to apologize, to make amends for how things ended. Reading her words felt like reopening an old wound, a reminder of everything she'd done to me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to delete her message and move on. But something held me back. That evening, I told Jasmine about it. She listened quietly, her expression unreadable as I explained the email. "So, what do you think?" I asked, still unsure of my own feelings. She took a deep breath, then looked at me. "I think it's your choice, Martin. But remember, you don't owe her anything. Not closure, not forgiveness. This is about what you need to move on." Her words lingered with me. It was true, I didn't owe Rebecca a thing. She'd made her choices, and she betrayed me in the worst way possible. But maybe, in some way, this was my chance to finally close that chapter for good. So, against my own instincts, I agreed to meet her. We arranged to meet at a cafe, a neutral place. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, older, like someone who'd been through her own share of storms. She offered me a tentative smile, which I didn't return. "Thank you for meeting me," she started, her voice softer than I remembered. I nodded, staying silent, letting her take the lead. She went on, telling me how she'd been wrong, how she regretted everything. She spoke of mistakes and her guilt, of how the scandal had affected her life. She even tried to apologize, but her words felt empty, hollow. It was as if she thought an apology could undo years of betrayal and lies. When she was finished, I looked at her, feeling a strange calmness. "Rebecca, I'm glad you wanted to apologize. But I didn't come here to forgive you or to relive the past. I'm here to let you know that I'm moving on, and that I don't need you in my life to do that. She flinched, looking down, probably realizing that this was the last conversation we'd ever have. I stood up, left some cash on the table, and walked out without a second glance. I didn't need her closure. I'd already found it on my own. That night, I told Jasmine about the meeting, and as I finished, I felt a weight lift from me. It was over. The chapter with Rebecca, the resentment, the betrayal, all of it was behind me now. Jasmine took my hand, giving it a small squeeze. "Proud of you, Martin," she said softly. And as we sat there in the quiet of my apartment, I realized that the future, the one I was building now, was finally mine to live, free of ghosts, free of the past. This life was mine, and I was ready to live it fully. With Rebecca finally out of my life for good, the days took on a quiet rhythm that felt right. Integrity First was flourishing, and I threw myself into the work, but without the same desperation. Each new client, every positive result, each company that embraced a cleaner, more transparent way of doing business, they were all a testament to what Jasmine and I had built together. And somewhere in the middle of it all, life felt like it was settling into place. One evening, after we'd secured a major client, Jasmine suggested we go out to celebrate. We found a cozy little jazz bar downtown, a place with low lights, soft music, and the kind of warmth that lets you relax and be present. As we sat at our table, sipping our drinks, it struck me how far we'd come, together and separately. The Martin who first walked into Jasmine's office with his world in pieces was a distant memory now. We fell into an easy conversation, laughing over memories of our investigation, of the days when we'd plotted McKay's downfall over coffee and late-night phone calls. When the conversation slowed, Jasmine looked at me with a curious smile, her eyes soft and reflective. "Martin," she said quietly, "are you happy?" The question took me by surprise, but I let myself think about it. Happiness used to be a goal, some far-off, elusive thing tied to stability or success. But now, sitting here with Jasmine, I felt something deeper, a contentment I hadn't known was possible. "Yeah," I said, the truth of it settling in. "I think for the first time in a long time, I really am." Her smile grew, and in that quiet moment, she reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. We sat there, holding hands, the soft jazz and dim lights wrapping around us like a blanket. I realized then that Jasmine wasn't just part of my past struggles or my work. She was part of my future, a future I wanted to explore with her by my side. The music played on, and as I looked into her eyes, I felt a sense of peace, like I'd finally arrived home. This wasn't just a new beginning, it was a life I could see myself living fully and freely, with someone who'd been there through every step, who had seen me at my worst and stayed. And in that moment, I knew I didn't just have a second chance. I had a future, one I was ready to embrace.
Bye.